Now, as you know, there is a desperate need for accommodation for these thousands of young men that cross the English Channel. And, there's the argument about hotels. Well, it doesn't really matter whether you put them in hotels or whether you put them in houses of multiple occupancy. But this one really did make me think. It's in Huddersfield, and we're going to stick with Yorkshire for this whole segment, actually. It was in Huddersfield, and there was some purpose-built student accommodation in Huddersfield. And we can look at the rooms. I mean, this is really high-end, very, very nice accommodation. But the government took out a contract, a lease. They paid £7 million for it. The hope was the centre could take over 700 asylum seekers, and yet it's remained empty for over a year, which I find absolutely, totally astonishing. But let's stick with Yorkshire, shall we? Because this is quite extraordinary. So Wakefield District Health and Care Partnership have entered into an engagement with asylum seeker accommodation hotels, giving migrants, asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, call them what you want, questionnaires to ask them, are they being looked after properly? Are they happy where they are? And some of the answers are really, really illuminating. And by the way, I have to pay credit to Zia Youssef from Reform. And this is all part of his Doge project, is to sort of reveal what's going on. Try this for size. One migrant complained there were no cigarettes in the room. Poor baby. Another said, I'd like to be moved nearer to my cousin in Halifax. And another said, I'm struggling here. I have a problem with the food. English food is like beans and things. At home we have different foods. Would be good to have things like rice. God help us. What are we doing? Are we offering these surveys to homeless people who served in the armed forces? Are we hell? Well, Tom, you were a minister involved in this area. The first one, we spend all this money on these big facilities and don't use them. That's back to almost the HS2 problem of procurement and left hand and right hand knowing what they're doing.
Well, that is absurd. And that accommodation should be being occupied, because actually where we've been since the election is the government has had to open hotels to meet the demand of more and more people crossing the channel.
Yeah.
We've seen this 40% increase. The accommodation footprint is getting bigger because the number of arrivals is getting bigger. Now, I support using those cheaper forms of accommodation. All of this is suboptimal. Of course it is.
So which ones do you support?
So I think, for example, that rather than having people in hotels, it is better and more cost-effective for the taxpayer for them to be in that student-type accommodation. But actually, the best answer for all of this is to just not have the crossings in the first place. And that's why, personally, I am very much at the point, and I think the public's definitely at this point, of saying that the only way that you are going to resolve this issue is if you detain people on arrival and that you are then able to relocate them to a third country, rather like we were seeking to do with Rwanda. That is the best way of solving this problem.
But you were
totally get the unfairness.
But when you were in government, Tom, when you were a minister, you said all this, but you were prevented from doing it by human rights lawyers.
I wish that we hadn't had the election. Of course, I wish we hadn't had the election in July and everything that flowed from that. Not least because I genuinely believe that we could have got that partnership.
Not a cat's chance in hell.
And
not a cat's chance in hell.
Well, there was a legislative basis to do it, and had that not been successful, I would say that we ought to do whatever was necessary to operationalise it.
The supremacy of law was with the European Convention on Human Rights.
And in that case, we should do whatever is necessary,
including
leaving it,
I don't believe it,
in order to, because fundamentally no British government is going to go against those key rights that people understandably care very much
I don't
about.
doubt your
but you cannot have this on immigration.
I don't doubt your sincerity, but I do doubt the sincerity of the colleagues of the last administration. Lloyd, can you see this sort of thing? It makes people absolutely go. The poor bloke didn't have fags in his room. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, the Huddersfield thing and the poor procurement is ridiculous. It is frustrating, and that, to me, should be... People in the departments should know that heads roll when things like that happen. Yeah. There's an episode of Yes Minister with hospitals that's a bit like this, about kind of not really being open and only part being open. I think on the fags thing, I've got no problem with surveys being done. I've got no problem... And actually, there are surveys done of homeless people about what issues affect them and their health needs. And I've seen that happen in Brighton, and that includes all people who are street homeless. The question is, how do you react to that survey? Do you take that survey and say, we're now going to provide...
The bloke doesn't like the food and wants a packet of fags.
Well, no, he wants to be able to smoke in his room. I don't think he wants a packet of fags.
No, he said there were no cigarettes in the room. Well,
I think that's bad. I think that's bad English. Him saying, I've been told. It says we were told there were no cigarettes in the room. That means you're not allowed to have cigarettes in the room. I think that's fine. People should be able to have the right to complain. Not all of them have come over on boats illegally. Some of these people are legally here and have claimed asylum through legal routes. There aren't very many of them, but there are some.
There aren't many.
And that's because there aren't many routes to get here.
Well, hang on, we have let 500,000 in since 2016.
We've let 500,000 in.
And we've taken them in from Ukraine. We've
not accepted any refugees and as Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians we accepted as not as classed as refugees. We classed them as a special visa program. The same with the Hong Kong. The same with the Hong Kong.
The Hong Kong ones count in the refugee numbers. Of course they do.
No, they don't count in the refugee numbers. Because they were offered a British overseas citizenship pathway, which I think is right to do. But let's just be honest, in the numbers...
But the numbers are huge. We've been incredibly generous.
No, you're quite right, you're quite right. And what we need to be is more circumspect. And as I keep saying on this programme, there are three things that I think there could be cross-party consensus on. One is that we should have overseas processing in France, which is perfectly legal, and other European countries are doing it under the convention.
Which would be a disaster, by the way.
Which would not be a disaster.
Numbers go up.
Because everybody who fails would get in a small boat and come
anyway.
No, because then they arrive and immediately you say, fantastic, into our minibus, we'll take you to our processing centre. Our processing centre is in France. You just constantly move people back. There is no accommodation here in the UK.
It's a novel approach.
That's what should happen. And it's fair, it's fair but friendly and also firm.
I tell you what, under this government, none of it's going to happen. Now, I think I'm probably going to have to give right of reply to Wakefield District Health and Care Partnership. And they say decisions on the future use of accommodation sites will be made in due course, consultation with local authorities and other stakeholders. That's on behalf of the Home Office. And in terms of the lease, well, they say the lease was agreed before the election, but it's all going to happen once they've complied with building regulations, etc. The whole thing's completely unacceptable.
At GB News, we believe in the power of free speech. We're not afraid to ask the tough questions, challenge the status quo, and give you a voice. While others silence dissent, we champion the truth. By becoming a GB News member, you're not just supporting free speech, you're defending it. Please consider supporting us today. Together, we'll hold the powerful to account and make sure that your voice is always heard. Simply go to gbnews.com/support and stand with us for what matters most.